Hello everyone. You're listening to The Race for Immortality. Listen, we've got some huge, amazing news that we teased in the last episode. Theodor, tell us what happened. What's going on? We're all on the edge of our seats.
I've been hinting lately that people have learned how to make 50 billion off a single drug. That was the first drug in its class, Ozempic. You probably know its patent is expiring, and the company Eli Lilly, we talked about this too, by the way, I mentioned it as well, though I haven't told the whole story connected to it yet. But Eli Lilly announced the successful completion of the third phase of the oral form of Ozempic, essentially demonstrating its equivalence to the injectable form. The substance was developed at Chugai, which is actually a subsidiary of Roche. It's a Japanese company very famous that has spent its entire existence making the best drugs in their class. So up until now, their strategy has been to find something that works for people and make it 100 times better. They've done this many times too. That's it. And it's clear that for them, the deal with Lilly looks very good right now. They're already receiving the first payments, which are quite substantial, and they're going to get a lot more of those payments. That's why, as I already hinted to you, Lilly allocated $500 million and handed it over to Mark Andreessen to manage, so they could create something even cooler than Ozempic. And the people who, before this Ozempic hype sold out, as it turns out now, not for enough money, and the real Ozempic, the one you can eat and not inject, they also now want to make not just the best in class, but the first in class. First in class means that now such a company needs not just to be able to make the best medicine in the world, but also to understand new biology. And against the backdrop of Ozempic, as I've hinted many times, well, everything except aging starts to look small in comparison. It seems to me that we've just accidentally ended up near this whirlpool, like Chugai with Lilly, and Lilly is feeling down, wondering what to do after oral Ozempic. Chugai is upset that they sold oral Ozempic too early, and now all these people are thinking about what to do next. People got excited about the idea, and they understand using Ozempic as an example. I just realized that, well, it might sound like I'm hyping it up, but I'm only praising it for one simple reason. Maybe you don't remember, but for a long time, people were obsessed with the idea of testing metformin against aging. There was also this idea that metformin reduces the risk of many diseases at once. So now we're going to run a trial. It was going to cost about 40 million, maybe 40 or 50. But there weren't any people, no philanthropists, no one, because everyone understood that the effect of metformin would be, well, at best, barely measurable. Meanwhile, Ozempic was the first to show an effect in reducing the risk of death from causes unrelated to diabetes and obesity, which it was originally developed for. Essentially, for the first time, there's a drug with a measured effect on lifespan. This is now a good benchmark for the entire industry. And so, as I already mentioned, once we found ourselves near this whirlwind, we met people who asked, is there anything else there besides Ozempic? Is there something that affects several diseases at once? Well, for a long time now, from our own perspective, we've been thinking, actually, I should probably mention this, that pharma companies are tired of people from the aging biology field coming to them and saying, look, aging is the single cause of all diseases. Well, not the only one, I'm exaggerating here, but it's the main one. Let's make a drug for aging, and everyone will be better off. As you can imagine, most of the time, for a specific medical problem, you can come up with a drug that will work much better than any anti-aging drug. I'm giving this example. It's not a great one, but it's very clear to everyone. Viagra solves an age-related problem better than rapamycin, and according to rumors, it even increases lifespan, as people are saying these days. Basically, after Ozempic, the pharmaceutical industry is faced with the question, how many more drugs like Ozempic are out there? How many common causes are there behind major diseases, behind the big illnesses? And how many can we make, how many targets can we find, and how many drugs can we develop that will simultaneously reduce the risk of a large number of diseases? And it's nice to see that the leading companies, Lilly, for example, are doing this now. You've probably heard of Bio, for instance, a company working in animal genetics with extreme biology, searching for targets, therapeutic targets that could help people. We're kind of the same example. BioAge is such an example too. So if anything, I won't talk for too long in general. I'll just keep it brief, and then if you want, I'll answer your questions. But the point is that after Ozempic, aging kind of becomes an obvious target, and people are interested in looking in that direction. Yes, of course, people think about diseases, not about aging yet, or rather, they do think about aging, but they should be thinking about diseases. So, in a way, it's nice to see that pharma has come up with such an interesting milestone for itself, a new next step. Like, let's find something else that affects a lot of diseases at once. As you can imagine, with this escalation, aging will soon come up. And in this sense, it will be a pleasure for us to work with big pharma companies that are ready to listen about aging, who, of course, are the best in the world at making medicines and, of course, understand how to conduct clinical trials for these medicines. I think this is an invaluable experience for us. The main thing, essentially, is that Gero can focus where Gero gets money, reputation, and, I hope, experience in the future, which will allow us to focus even more on what, even by Gero's moonshot standards, are drugs that would significantly extend life, rather than being aimed at treating specific.
So, what actually happened?
What happened? People took from us the target that we had validated in animals. They will make antibodies against it because they are world champions in antibody production, in antibody development, and they will pay us up to $14 billion incrementally as development progresses. And how many dollars? I don't, $250 million. So they pay an upfront amount and then in installments later as development progresses. Let me say again, these are the best people in the world at developing antibodies. So they'll definitely make the drug faster than we could, and faster than many others if it works. They'll bring it to people and we'll find out whether it works or not. The target, just to clarify, is a target whose suppression in old mice extends their lifespan. So, in my opinion, this is a really interesting point. Pharma is now going after aging, not just disease.
Wait, you sold an anti-aging vaccine to a pharmaceutical giant?
We sold the target because this giant develops antibodies that...
We ourselves, I still can't believe it. We sold the license to create vaccines.
Yes. Not vaccines, but...
Antibodies, not vaccines.
A therapeutic antibody.
Well, just last week we were discussing interleukin 11. That Kalika bought it.
Kalika got involved, yes.
It's the same approach.
Yes, exactly the same, except that the people are interested in a different biology that we have. So I hope this is just the beginning of a good collaboration, which is positive because it's already working, and will keep working like this because it can work.
And in case of success, well, there's 250 million. That's the first stage. And then there are royalties.
Yes, and then, royalties, yes. So our deal is what you call uncapped. So we don't have a cap. Well, I'm not exactly sure right now, but I think in the deal with interleukin, there is a cap. The total amount is specified, the maximum amount, something like 574 million or so, which will be paid out if everything goes well. In our deal, there is no such upper cap or limit. So there is a fixed amount of fixed payments as development progresses, plus royalties from sales.
Are we rich?
Well, with a reasonable probability, we kind of have a stake in a binary outcome. So in the multiverse, we're rich.
We're rich in biobucks.
Yeah, that's called being rich in biobucks, or on average in the multiverse.
Pedia, listen, congratulations. Listen, this is incredible. This is, in fact, 15 years of work, 15 years of effort, a huge amount of labor, nerves, and trials. Listen, this is incredible. This is big. This is really big news for our whole field. Look, you searched, and it seems that Pharma is already paying for licenses for targets against many.
And take a look at what Novartis wrote last week. They finally realized, too, that an anti-aging drug, the one they were afraid to create. Now they're also saying that they want to make a medicine that will affect several diseases at once. So I think, look, in my opinion, our deal should be viewed from two angles. First, Pharma is making deals with small companies working in the field of aging. Interleukin 11, BIAH, Fanubio. In my view, that's a trend. And second, which I also find extremely interesting, of course, Pharma makes drugs better than we do, better than almost, if we're talking about Chugai, then probably better than everyone else. They argue among themselves about who does it better. And in this situation, in a reasonable world, I think there should be a division of labor where people who are working on new biology, for example, can sell their developments to Pharma at an early stage so that Pharma can take them and make medicines faster and cheaper than an inexperienced team could do with investors' money. It seems to me that right now we're at an interesting point where, 10 years ago to make money, you had to get to phase 2, and 3 years ago to make money, you needed to get an IND and hand it over to Pharma, which would then do the clinical trials. Now, the upfront payment is already around $100 million, right? At the end of last year, that was for a preclinical asset. And I think this top-down flow is now breaking through even further. Pharma says, hands off, we'll make the drugs ourselves. But if you have some breakthrough new biology, then we'll license it from you, not for a grant of $2 million to a university like it was 20 years ago, but for proper upfront payments, payouts, and as we're seeing more and more, Pharma is even willing to share royalties. The only explanation I have right now is that the entire pharma industry is facing what's called a patent cliff. This is a situation where all the drugs that make tens of billions of dollars are coming off patent. As usual, management forgot to invest in fundamental science and only remembered about it right around the time the patents are expiring. This is exactly what, in my opinion, is creating a unique situation in the market right now, where people who have non-trivial biology, well, like Andre was talking about RetroBio, which also basically licensed a paper, right, from NHB Technology, well, a publication. So it seems to me that there is now a certain journal impact factor where a paper published there can be sold for tens of millions of dollars in future payments. This has never happened before.
Pecker, so you're commenting now, like you wrote in the press release, that you licensed the target itself, right, and not the antibodies.
Yes. Even though we cry at night, we actually do have a therapeutic agent, and this is a good moment to mention vaccines. But again, I understand that Chugai will make an antibody faster than I can make a vaccine. So to me, this is actually a sign of the world's rationality starting to show that, well, the cost of drug development keeps rising, even though every component of drug development technology is exponentially dropping in price. In my opinion, pharma now has enormous experience in developing treatments for just about anything. The missing aspect isn't even what isomorphic is doing, like how to make a molecule against a protein or AlphaFold, invent me a protein. The missing piece is understanding complex biology. Everything else pharma does very well. And for me, I think it's encouraging to see that pharma itself understands that this is a commodity for them. It's becoming a commodity internally as well. That's exactly why, in my opinion, deals are going down. And as I say, they're getting closer to science. This creates, in my opinion, a kind of golden opportunity for all the teams that have non-trivial biology. And right now, the stronger the effect, the bigger the problem, the better.
Petra, can you tell us how you protected intellectual property here? Because usually that's where the nuances and questions come in. When you try to sell a target to someone, it's hard to patent it. If there's anything non-confidential you can share, so we could all learn from it.
And then there will be the confidential part. We won't tell anyone.
Look, once again, yes, there's this issue, and the issue itself even sounds kind of funny, that targets are either protected or not protected by patents. Well, somewhere up there in the Supreme Court, aside from some political issues, there's currently a case bogged down about whether a patent will be granted for a target or not. But my expectation is that most likely it won't be, as if that means you can't make a deal. If all you have is the target, even if you haven't filed a patent application, even if we assume the patent will be granted, it's most likely going to be challenged. Just like you're right, it's as if that means the deal is impossible. On the other hand, if you take into account, as they say, where there's a will, there's a way. If a company understands that it needs these kinds of deals, and I mean, you've seen the examples, Lilly does it, Novartis does it. Basically, everyone is making these kinds of deals. If companies need these kinds of deals, then that means a good CD. So basically, you get the terms at the moment when you still haven't disclosed the target, you sign the CD and exchange data. That's it. And you have the terms, and it's just a matter of revealing the target.
And what about the vaccine? For multiple age-related, for several age-related diseases? How feasible is that?
Well, let's jump into that as well. It's extremely interesting because aging seems to be a problem that's caused, well, internally as a result of the body's activity over decades. And it was assumed that you can make a vaccine against infectious diseases. And as we know, you can make a vaccine against cancer. There are a huge number of people now working on vaccines against oncological diseases, including those caused by infections. People are searching for certain proteins that mutate that aren't present in a normal body and training the immune system to kill cells that produce such proteins. And just recently, there was a remarkable study showing that these things are indeed very possible. Just recently, the second phase of an HIV vaccine trial was completed in China, where they managed to create a vaccine that kills not the virus itself, but the cells infected with HIV. The results there are also promising. What was not obvious before is that you can actually make a vaccine against your own protein. So here I have a kind of biopunk story. I'll tell it and then get back to aging because there was a great example this week. As you probably know, the entire Western world is treated with antibodies, and antibodies aren't exactly cheap. It's hard to make a single injection cost less than $1,000. Well, in the Western world, checks for $5,000 or $6,000 per dose are kind of normal. But if you go to Latin America or even to very wealthy Asian countries, it becomes a serious issue. And in this sense, Cuban biotech pleasantly surprised the whole world by creating a sort of Frankenstein. People took one of the human proteins that is present in large amounts in lung cancer, against which there are antibodies that work extremely well in lung cancer, if anything at all works well in lung cancer. The guys made this very human protein, added a bacterial protein to it, and chemically stitched them together. And then they injected this kind of monster directly into a person's bloodstream. From the immune system's point of view, this kind of protein turned out to be not entirely human because a real bacterial protein was added to it as an adjuvant, and naturally the human body starts producing antibodies not only against the bacterial protein, which doesn't really matter in this story, but also against the human one. This particular thing, Simivax, is widely used in various Latin American countries. Specifically, the Cubans are the ones who sell it, and consequently, many Americans have started traveling to these Latin American countries in order to get treated quite cheaply. The FDA made the Cuban manufacturer conduct trials of this vaccine in the US at the Roswell Park Cancer Center in Buffalo, USA. And to everyone's surprise, this thing works. Just this week, if we go back to industry news, we saw a very similar example. Let me tell you which group it was. They did the same thing. They took a protein that triggers a very strong immune response, also foreign, non-human. They added a peptide to it, a product of the processing of one of the human proteins, an aging marker that is expressed with age, combined them, and chemically injected it into a person. The human immune system was activated against its own protein and began to destroy blood cells that had too many aging markers. As a result, well, they don't have experimental evidence of increased lifespan yet. This, as I understand it, is the first study. The guys showed that in these animals after vaccination, the signs of aging decrease significantly, or, for example, oxygen consumption increases, the state of the immune system improves, and so on. So by all indications, it looks like a working classic anti-aging drug.
Who did this?
Let me tell you exactly right now. Anyway, I posted it on Twitter. I think we'll share the link. In my opinion, or rather, just like I predicted about Lily and told you the story about Chugai, I'm making another prediction now. I'm telling you now that in the coming year, we'll see a whole series of such vaccines because, well, I think vaccines are just an absolutely brilliant solution for an anti-aging drug. No one in their right mind is going to do that. Hang on, let me open the link. No one in their right mind is going to take an anti-aging pill every day, unless they're feeling really bad. In this sense, the vaccine, in your opinion, especially for vulnerable groups like all sorts of elderly people, those who have survived cancer or are just very old and at risk of dying from a seasonal vaccine or from some seasonal illness. So, in my view, people like that will be getting these kinds of vaccines very soon. And, well, trust my predictions. I think this year we'll be discussing a few more groups who have done this.
And there was also a connection between vaccination against viral agents and life expectancy, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes, there's something about dementia in the meta-analyses and so on. But again, I'm a more rational person here. I get really excited every time a meta-analysis of clinical trials reveals after the fact that if you inject for one thing, something else stops being a problem. But I wouldn't count on that too much. It seems to me that in scientific research, maybe, 30% should be devoted to exploration. And what's being done with vaccines, in my opinion, is unique bioengineering. Because no matter who tells you about Kurzweil's nanorobots, which were supposed to appear in the 2020s and cure all diseases, the closest thing that actually exists in nature, the most fearsome creature on the planet, is our immune system cells. They're the only creatures that could kill us in a second if they wanted to. And if we assign them the task of destruction, well, they already handle various types of damage in our bodies. If we further train them, teach them to fight the signs of aging, I think that's extremely promising. We won't be able to do it as well as they do for a very long time.
Wow, that's incredible. Just incredibly interesting.
Yes, this is a Chinese study.
A door has just been opened to something amazing, to a whole new class of drugs, therapies, and approaches.
Yeah, let me just speak from my own experience. We worked on vaccines, including the solution that we sold. If you look at the development cycle and the end result, well, it really does look like magic. Yeah, we read and write articles about what can be done with awkward compounds and so on. But when you look at the development timeline, sometimes it feels like the future has already arrived. If something can be done with a vaccine, if it's about aging, in my opinion, that's exactly where we should often be starting right now.
But why didn't you yourself? Wait, Ilya Fet, why didn't you bring in the drugs yourself?
We will, Misha, everything's ready. Vex.
Lot. Now we have money and a whole lot of biobucks. So after this deal,
We hope the biobucks will help us get through. A good person, a smart person with biobucks will achieve more than a smart person without them.
yeah, I have a question, Peter. You made a good strategic point, but tactically, with JFK Jr., right, with Kennedy Jr., who's now heading the FDA, and he came out with this. Well, it was a kind of performative anti-vaxxer platform. He's not actually that hardcore of an anti-vaxxer in reality. But still, yeah, there are some anti-vaccine sentiments at the regulator right now. How would you adjust your strategy to that?
First of all, as always, you could just say that everything's lost and we're all going to die. Yeah, that's probably the safest prediction you can make. Unfortunately, even now, the considerable experience we have in this field, at least over time, shows that development cycles will probably, I hope, last longer than the political lifespan of individual citizens. So some projects that already have data, especially those that manage to attract investment earlier, will move much further ahead. I think we'll see some rebranding in the near future. So I get that right now, writing in a grant application that you're working on mRNA therapeutics is probably not the smartest idea, but I'm just waiting for some creative people who, I don't know, in 100-something months will come up with a name that lets us all use it.
Let's remember genomic selection, which was invented instead of.
Yeah, I'm just waiting. Yeah, I'm patiently waiting for the precise moment when a truly brilliant and exceptionally witty group of people with a remarkably good sense of humor and sharp intellect go up against this particular group of citizens, and soon we'll undoubtedly see a really clever, innovative, and effective solution to this complex problem. Break time equals 0.5s/.
And what about the indications? Pedia. What are they going to do about the indications?
Well, look, I mean, we probably all understand deep down that if you want to increase lifespan, but you don't want to, God forbid, address aging itself in the way you and I write about it, well, that's a metabolic disorder. That's 6 years, early diabetes, that's 6 years of life. Will a good diabetes medication extend life? It will. Does that make it an anti-aging drug? Well, that's a matter of opinion. Some people think no, some people think yes. In my view, pharma is looking at this very sensibly right now. All aspects related to critical health have a huge impact on lifespan. If you can show an effect in metabolic models, it's clear that you can combine it with semaglutide, save the mouse, and see what happens. Basically, there's a whole universe there that has a huge impact. It all goes there first and foremost, and then some specific things are clearly demonstrated there, and then there are some smaller, yet significantly sharper in terms of their precise translation indications. But first, everyone wants to see that it's about metabolic health.
But I still didn't get it. Did Pedia answer the question?
Well, I think.
Diabetes. Diabetes, yes.
Well, it's just that diabetes is also kind of a vague thing, right? Because when you say diabetes, some people think that just lowering glucose already treats diabetes. Not everyone is convinced about that. Diabetes is also a disease that has a lot of causes, as they say, many phenotypes. And which of them actually affects, a person's quality of life, that's a big question. And that's why people just try out the existing sets of models, so to speak, that people experiment with. If there's even something that's not quite like the best drug in the field, they go for it because there might be another modality, right? Like with one drug, muscles waste away, with another, they don't. Who wouldn't buy a company right now if it could bring muscles back?
Listen, here's the thing. You're already super experienced in all this, in HIV, in biotech, as a researcher. What advice or direction would you give to someone who wants to break into the field? Would you say, now is the golden age? And someone might look at this and say, my God, it's the golden age, so what am I doing just sitting here? So what should they do then? So, for example, what would you advise a scientist, an investor, or a fund to do right now at the starting point? Given certain opportunities, what would you do in their place? What should you do? How? What should you do to make it rain gold? Sorry.
Yes. Right. Well, look, I think we're just at a very interesting bifurcation point where, in fact, out of everything people have done in longevity, strangely enough, well, BioAge is a really good example. They started out as a company focused on the biology of aging, but ended up being a company in the field of, well, basically diabetes, right? A metabolic disorder related to that, like muscle mass or something else. So, as I already said, the biggest impact on human lifespan comes from metabolic syndrome if we're not talking about aging itself. And it seems to me that there are already too many players there. Big Pharma is already involved, and a lot of money has been invested in that area. I think it's boring. And right now, in my opinion, it's actually a really good time for some kind of escalation. Because if you just chase after Ozempic and try to make the next so-called best-in-class drug according to Chuggov, you won't succeed. So most likely, you need to escalate and try to develop a drug that will be an anti-aging medication. How to do that is really a matter of taste. There are different ideas out there. But what I see now is that people are working on epigenetics, yes, as one of the options, regardless of what I personally think about it, but as a direction. I'm sure there are several other directions as well. I see it, I always joke about this when I give talks. Everyone says that, well, supposedly they're not interested in aging, but when we talk to some of them, believe me, they're very interested. It's just that all of them have a money counter in their eyes, and they realize this is a really big deal. They don't see much.
But how do you even compare ideas? So, there's this idea.
Effect. That's it, just the size of the effect.
Pedia, maybe you could describe, like,
They're not impressed.
the timeline a bit, like the development timeline, how long it took Gera and how long it might take now for, say, the next generation of companies?
I think this might be, maybe it was Gera. Ari, there's also this anthropological angle here, right? So when the idea of these aging markers came up, how did that happen? Someone wrote a book, explained it to investors and scientists. A consensus formed, right? A huge consensus emerged. And the people who did projects within this consensus, well, a huge number of projects got funded. And well, that's how science moves forward, right? Everything that can be done within this consensus has basically already entered clinical trials or is about to. It seems to me that all these epidemic-related things are actually the last ones to enter the clinic within this concept. Well, now they're gradually making their way into clinical trials, and sooner or later we'll find out the results. Anything that doesn't fit into this, there are no talents there, right? No scientists, no investors who understand it, no experts who don't understand it. And I think that's always how science develops. As Besenbrock joked, science moves from funeral to funeral. When a consensus emerges, everything within that consensus gets tried and done. Anyone who comes in with new ideas before that consensus falls apart, well, they suffer, right? So when you say now that when new people come into this field, they'll primarily turn to other ideas. Well, because there's nothing left to do within the old consensus, and I think people are now ready for a new consensus. And that's why I think there has to be something new. So when I see people who are, say, growing embryos, trying to cultivate organs or some tissues, that's clearly something new compared to what was before. It's clear that there will be a new consensus there. It'll be about regeneration, some attempt at rejuvenation, and, well, some fringe stuff too. In short, to answer Misha's question, definitely not for something that's already been done. Like another attempt to make an anti-inflammatory drug or a senolytic, well, 10 years ago, that would have guaranteed funding for a company, but now it definitely doesn't anymore. So now investing in the new consensus.
It's a combination.
Well, again, I have different positions on this. Try to convince me combinations are terrible for pharma, for drug development. You've got variability in cytochromes, in albumin, and so on. Well, basically, if you look at the volume of preclinical work, right, pharmacology, I always ask people who pitch combinations, where's the evidence that combinations are great? Synthetic lethality, right? That's cancer.
Yes.
That's a very old story. How many examples of synthetic lethality are there as approved strategies on the market? About zero.
Yes.
Because in order to achieve synthetic lethality with drugs of different properties and different, well, basically, it's a huge undertaking. I mean, we even calculated it. It's a very expensive preclinical stage.
And what is synthetic lethality?
Synthetic lethality is, well, even long before longevity, we still think that someday a combination will be shown, when, by the way, I actually don't really know of any such examples. Well, maybe a few. When you have one drug and then a second drug, and together they don't just add up their effects, but actually give an effect that's an order of magnitude greater, we know.
Antilethality.
Yes, there are such mutations, right? And in oncology, it's a very well-known situation that drugs are often toxic because some function is present in normal cells as well. That's why everyone dreamed, and there are many demonstrated examples of this, of being able to give a drug that's only slightly toxic to a normal cell and only slightly toxic to a cancer cell. A second drug, which is only slightly toxic to either one or the other, but in combination, they become catastrophically toxic to the cancer cell. There are many known examples like this, and it would seem that this should create some fantastic opportunity to treat people with much safer drugs. Despite this, if you look at the articles on synthetic lethality and how many hackathons and competitions there have been just to predict synthetic lethality, there was a whole huge field. If you look at practical applications, there isn't a single approved protocol where a combination of drugs is actually used to treat something. It's very hard to do.
Well, now it's probably easier. Probably with antibodies. Yes, with these antibodies that are more.
Yes, now we see that they're trying, or not even just trying, but there definitely are such cases. Yes, and CBM has these kinds of antibodies right there. But yes, never say never. It's just that, as I understand it, they're very close in some of their properties, but I don't really know. Anyway, look, I agree with you. Yeah, I guess I took too gloomy a tone for some reason. I'm just saying that it's hard. It's hard to test, especially when it's some kind of new biology. The level of the unknown for a single drug is already huge, and most likely, I just know the amount of preclinical work you have to do for a combination, and it's unpleasantly larger. And with preclinical work, you just do it. You burn through millions of dollars and get almost nothing in return. You only get permission to try something on people. Again, it's not that I have some strong stance here. I just have an aesthetic position when it comes to combinations. It's not a practical one, but an aesthetic one. It seems to me that it's just harder to do and reflects a kind of insufficient understanding.
Look, this is actually quite a good and insightful statement. Like, as a comprehensive solution for the entire field, especially for new and emerging players, it's fundamentally about creating a new and widely accepted consensus.
And right now, exactly what's happening.
And really, the field is buzzing right now. All these dinosaurs, these giants are saying, listen, we can't go on like this anymore. We're not satisfied. Everything's wrong.
Misha, sorry for interrupting you right now. Basically, well, if I were, I don't know, maybe not angry, but I'll just say something a bit ironic about the topic right now. Pretty much everything has been tried by now. The epidemic rollback is the last one, well, out of those big, classic signs of aging that are now being brought into the clinic on a large scale with solid funding. It always scares me when our last hope is the most recent technology that has appeared. So if immune factors hadn't been discovered by chance, our old consensus would have already run its course by now. That's why I think there's a general understanding that the old consensus is coming to an end. Some of this was created, right? They did, just like other people did. I'm sure that with epigenetics, people working on reprogramming will succeed. I actually feel optimistic about that in terms of specific diseases. We discussed this last time, Parkinson's and especially type 1 diabetes. I think there will be. It's just that new therapeutic modalities will emerge. Well, yeah, we'll end up in a situation where we've tried a lot of things, and yet our best result is what? Like 1 extra year of life from. A new consensus will start to form moving forward.
Again, rejuvenation.
My question was about, so what can be done here to, well, speed this up? So what is that, exactly? These are questions about the discussion of how aging works, what aging actually is.
Yeah, so we can see this happening, right? We have a growing group of people who say that through trial and error, we've already tried just about everything. Pretty much everything related to aging has been covered in one way or another. What's needed? What's needed is this group, which I belong to. I believe that unless you have a theory, well, let's say you can jump from hill to hill, you might even fly, but if you don't understand anything about aerodynamics or whatever else, you're just guessing. But you're not going to make it to the moon, because to get to the moon, you need to calculate exactly, down to the kilogram, how much of everything you need. So it seems to me that either we'll get fantastically lucky, which is always possible, or people will first figure out what's really going on, and only then will they create a proper anti-aging drug.
And just recently, Joao Pedro published a review on theories of aging. And I read it, and honestly, I even got a little choked up, like there's really nothing solid to hold on to.
Listen, I actually read that article too, and it horrified me. I mean, it could have been written 20 years ago. That's the thing. It's just amazing, he says, look at the situation, and yet we're still in the same place. Is aging programmed? Is it not programmed? Some facts about aging, well, the ones that were already known decades ago. Listen, but I want to, bring up something else. But this is actually one of the things. Well, we're also moving in this direction with you. Like, let's talk about theories of aging, let's have discussions, let's do experiments, and still try to figure out whether aging exists. No, I mean, does it even exist at all? But even the fact that we have so much trouble defining aging, that also tells us something, that maybe we're dealing with some kind of emergent property that just can't really be pinned down. Like, there's mitochondrial dysfunction, there's the accumulation of lympho.
Look, Misha, the very fact that there's an emergent discussion, again, about what aging is, actually shows that a new consensus is ready to emerge.
Look, I have a bit of a comment here, but the idea of let's make a general theory of aging, that's been around for, decades already. And I even did a survey back in, I think, 2007, where I asked scientists, what needs to be done? A general theory of aging. And, Years and decades go by, and all of this. I never get tired of recalling the words of Fralkes, academician Fralkes, who said back in 1971, our descendants will not forgive us for the years and decades we lost in studying aging. So, 50 years.
Of course. Yeah, Brian Kennedy had a really funny take on this. At least I found it funny. He says, you see, the field got caught in a trap where it turned out there are a huge number of ways to slightly influence aging. So if everything had been a dead end and nothing worked at all, people would have thought much harder and maybe come up with something truly interesting. We ended up in a situation where, well, to put it a bit cynically, almost everything works, at least when it comes to simple things. The problem is that nothing works in a big way. And this time that it took to try everything out and realize that everything gives about the same weak result, that's just the time, I think, from the early 2000s up to now, 20 years. There were a couple dozen $1 billion, 20 years, a huge number of clinical trials. That's the trap, when people came in and said, we don't need to understand what aging is at all. Look, we pull this lever and, you know, the mouse lives longer. Off it goes to the clinic. That's it, a nature-type paper for the tech companies, clinical trials.
So look, about this approach. Literally yesterday, I read an article by Ilya Keshever. It really blew me away. The article is about, well, how to create a virtual model of a cell. This is also a super central task in biology, as part of the huge challenge of establishing the connection between genotype and phenotype. And if we had a virtual model of a cell, it would speed up research 1,000,000 times. And it seems that creating a virtual model of a cell is an easier task than defeating aging, and it should have, been solved earlier. And so, as I understood the article, they say, well, of course, you can use your own intelligence to imagine what will happen in the cell and come up with some kind of logic, but in the end, the data will decide everything. Just collect the data, and neural networks will tell you, as if it's just about the data, right? Just give 1,000,000 times more data and that's it. And it doesn't. I thought, listen, all of this could actually be related to aging. You just need more single-cell sequencing data, transcriptomes, metabolomes, everything possible, clinical data, and cross-referencing all of it. And that's basically it. So the solution doesn't lie in theory, not in how you understand aging, maybe, but simply in accumulating a critical amount of information. And when will there be a lot of drugs? As a derivative of this information. And maybe that's exactly what we need to focus on, making it cheaper and getting more data. And basically, that's the solution.
Look, well, I would comment on it like this. First of all, well, you can never have too much data. There's really no scenario where you shouldn't be collecting data. I'm sure that what the British did with the UK Biobank, for example, and now almost every country is following suit, and we're starting to see this growing trend. There's a huge amount of human data being collected, and it's going to become even more accessible. That's just absolutely awesome. It's kind of a necessary condition. The difference compared to classic artificial intelligence is that neural networks also really took off when a huge number of users uploaded tons of photos and labeled all of them, right? In other words, a titanic amount of work was done to make all that happen. The data wasn't just created for nothing, but it was also well labeled. But the problem is that when networks that work with images or data do something, the consumer immediately understands. Did you get your money's worth? Do you like the picture in Midjourney or not? Do you like the text that ChatGPT wrote or not? The problem is that when a network hallucinates while making a prediction about aging, you only find out it hallucinated after $50 million and 6 years have passed. What I think everything comes down to right now is that a fully data-driven approach just doesn't work quickly, for the simple reason that there aren't people in the population who live 1,000 times longer than the average person. Unfortunately, almost all the machine learning methods I'm currently working with perform very poorly outside the boundaries of their training dataset. And that's why I think there's no problem creating a drug that increases human lifespan by 5% with the data we have now or will have soon. But it's still extremely difficult, at least for now, unless we get something like CHA or whatever, to create a drug that increases lifespan by 10 times, or maybe not 10, but even just 2 times. That is, anything that goes beyond the boundaries, anything that goes beyond the boundaries of the training dataset is currently handled poorly by modern models. I don't want to sound negative, but when you're trying to go after that $1 million, it's not the same as just looking at a picture.
Can I then, by comparison?
I just wanted to use the word. Andre will say,
I guess I'll just add that yes, it really is difficult to build a model that can actually understand something and extrapolate to new situations or scenarios. When, yes, we produce more data for normal cells under normal conditions with the same, say, rapamycin in standard therapies. So, we'll find out how the cell responds to these therapies, what kinds of states it can have. But we won't see how this cell will live longer, or how this organism will live longer, because that just doesn't exist. So basically, we need to invent an anti-aging pill in order to invent an anti-aging pill.
yeah, making it better won't be a problem at all later, once they appear. I think what Andre was telling us about is a good option. Yeah, when there are some memory factors, we can optimize them in some way. Even with molecules, if God wills it and some molecule sticks to a protein, I can totally see a scenario where, for optimizing something that's already almost working, well, machine learning, or rather modeling, really gives a real boost in terms of time and money. What worries me is this situation. I always explain it to myself like this. Physicists came to the government and asked for money for an atomic bomb, even though there was no atomic bomb anywhere in nature. That is, they couldn't use any kind of machine learning to figure out how an atomic bomb works. We're lucky in biology. We have animals that age extremely slowly. At least we don't have to prove that atomic bombs exist. There are animals running around nearby that age more slowly, and that actually gives me hope that by gathering a significant amount of data just among mammals, we might even be able to use machine learning to figure out why they age more slowly. So here it seems to me that, well, in biotech, the winner isn't the one who explains everything, but the one who finds the maximum effect first. The maximum effect is visible in the minimal amount of data, as long as that data is generated correctly. And in my opinion, the competition now is about who can assemble that, even if expensive, even if large, but the first correct dataset where the phenomena you need actually exist. Well, and after that, of course, it's machine learning and everything else. Who would doubt it, right? Right now, we're at the dataset design stage.
Go ahead, Andre, your turn.
Yeah, well, really, who else is going to pay for this? So the eternal problem in AI, in biology, and in aging as well, is that the money only comes in when Pedia sells some molecule or a target. Well, or sells a therapy. So, the leap from this virtual cell model to an actual therapy, that gap needs to be bridged in order to get paid even for developing the model itself. And right now, a lot of small companies in this field are simply dying because they can't reach any further sources of funding. So, they build a model, it seems to work, but to actually test it, you already need, like, 5 million, 10 million.
Sorry to interrupt. I just know people who calculated how much is needed, who ran into philanthropic investors who said that anyone working on anti-aging therapy is a fraud. So, of course, you need data and people with deep pockets. Ask people how much it would cost to create a proper dataset. So, ultra-mated dataset for modeling mammals, probably going to collect some other ones too, right? For them. So the guys calculated that the first attempt costs $50 million. So, like, how much? Maybe we don't know for sure, but I have a strong suspicion that if it's a good data set, if you do it right, if it's even technically possible, it's probably not 50, but 100. If you start doing it, as they say, not in a year, but in 3, if you want to do it with quality. So, these are significant investments, and that's just one of the hypotheses. This is what, in my opinion, still doesn't fully allow us to count on artificial intelligence as the solution to the problem. Again, artificial intelligence really took off when the cost of a photograph dropped to zero in every sense. When users started paying $1,000 for a camera connected to the internet. That's when machine learning, as we know it, really took off. In biology, to create a dataset for a specific task, you might need $50 million.
Listen, but $50 million on the scale of 100 or 200 million doesn't seem like that much money. Especially if what's at stake on the other end is something like a cure for aging.
But you know, it's always a question of whether it's really worth spending $50 million on this. Because again, there are always a bunch of people around with different hypotheses. And neural networks started working at the moment when, as I said, people themselves began paying $1,000 for cameras and started labeling data themselves in massive quantities. And then it would have been strange if the companies that own this data hadn't started studying it somehow. In biology, unfortunately, almost all data is collected for a specific task. It's very hard to use the same data set for something else because everyone has little money, so they do the minimum number of measurements just to see exactly what they want to see.
Listen, but don't clinical institutions have enough data? After all, you're dealing with hundreds of millions of medical records.
Well, yes, out of 100 million electronic medical records, about 10 million, okay. And in some states, you don't even know when a person died because for some reasons, it's forbidden to report in the database that a person has died, for example. I mean, no, look, all these problems will be solved. I'm sure that in 10 years, all the things we're talking about now didn't even exist 10 years ago. So we dove into the biology of aging when none of what we're discussing now existed, and our first data set that we collected about. It's funny to say, but back then we had just over 1,000 samples. Now you have hundreds of thousands of samples in the biobank, and in 5 years, who knows, it'll be millions. In Singapore alone, there will be millions of samples. Everything is changing very quickly. The problem is, as I keep saying, in biotech, you have to be the first to do something. And to be the first to do something, because when there's an endless amount of data, when some kind of, is just being trained on this data and starts making discoveries on its own, on this data and starts doing discovery itself. By that time, the more clever people will have already extracted all the strong effects from this data using simpler methods.
Listen, finally, I truly want to take this very important moment to invite all of our valued viewers who
who work in IT, engineering, artificial intelligence, or biology, to join us at the hackathon on the 17th and 18th. The link will be in the description. July, 17th of July, it will be in Russian. And on the 1st, around the 1st of September, it will be at the beginning of September, it will be in English. The tasks, the link to the website will be in the description. We're organizing everything together. That includes the company Gero, the company Retrobite, our sponsors, and thinkers from the Institute of Human Aging and the Economics of Human Aging are also represented with their own tasks. Today, I found out that our new friends at Chugai, together with SoftBank is investing in Chugai's project to create drug development agents. Actually, their hackathon with us will be all about using multi-agent systems to solve problems. If anyone.
We need to pass this on through you guys' management about this.
I'll meet with them on August the 4th, and I'll certainly troll them.
Yeah, go for it. Why not?
No, 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 we definitely need to pass it on, because if you get this person interested even once, he'll give a lot of money, more than you need.
What impresses me more right now is this convergence of these mega funds from classic pharma, Lily Andreevna, SoftBank, and Chugai. So like I've said many times before, I see some kind of maybe temporary or maybe it's a trend. But right now, at this very moment, there's a huge interest from leading tech investors, and that's.
Listen, here's the thing. Such a huge, massive deal for the company Gera, and really for all of Russian-speaking biotech, for the Russian-speaking longevity sector. And it's been working for many years. What are your own personal feelings about it? What's going on there? How do you feel about it? How do you perceive it?
Well, you know, the frog is boiled slowly, right? When you're in the system, you don't really notice the speed, do you?
Tell me, do your Russian roots ever get in the way? I mean, in your work, in attracting investments in America, in Europe, and so on.
I think so, but to make a statement about it, what you'd call biology with statistics, it's hard to prove significance because no one will say it outright. But the feeling is yes, of course. I have to say, look, let me answer this question directly now. If you already have something that's in the second phase, then they'll buy from anyone, right? So pharma as a whole is pretty well protected from all sorts of sanctions and so on for humanitarian reasons. The problem is that biotech is capital intensive. Capital intensity isn't about medicine or pharma itself, it's about investment. Investment is exactly the area where people are scared of any sneeze, any hint of sanctions, political issues, and so on. That is precisely because biotech requires a lot of money. That's exactly why biotech entrepreneurship, no matter what anyone says, definitely feels the country of origin.
Listen, I also want to, I think the achievement, we know about the development of the Garrett company over its long journey. I want to congratulate you, and I see a big achievement in your early investors, especially Sergey, yes. All of them, all of them, all of them. That is, those who believed, who.
Taking this opportunity, yes, to pass on.
Well, hold on, let me say something about Serioza. I think that thanks to his faith in you, in this, you were able to go so far. I mean, after all, you weren't a fully commercial company yet, not the kind where you have to show profits in a year or two. That allowed you, to.
In general, Sergey had, in my opinion, the right idea about how to build a company like this.
Yes. So I think it's worth taking a closer look at what projects he's working on now. And I think you guys are already recognized, real giants. But Sergey might already.
In biotech, every day you're just one step away from failure. And if you look at what you do during the day, you're basically proving that you're wrong. In other words, even the very process of working is set up so that, unless you're an idiot, you spend your time proving that this time the money didn't work out. You know what I mean? So really, why are you asking me how it feels? Let's keep going.
That's classic Pedia. What else did you expect?
We're chewing glass and staring into, the depths of the abyss.
When will we finally be able to inject ourselves and extend our lives already?
Yeah, with passive.
You have to act on all fronts. You know, sinning I do well, but scaling up is even better. So, in order to,
The scale of personality, you have to grow your personality scale. That's the only scenario.
that's actually a really strong thought. Longevity is missing someone like Elon Musk, just like that.
You know, I don't know. Well, Landa already wrote all those formulas for everything, like the optimal distance to look at a girl and so on. And he also rated all the scientists using something like a stellar magnitude scale. And it seems to me, yeah, that any field depends on how many people it has. We need large scale people, people with big vision.
At Flibuster, it's all developed by AI, large-scale people.
That's why I told you last time, we're just waiting for the bubble to burst, because we'll all die before they make.
By the way, how do you poke it with a needle?
Listen, well, there's a meeting itself, right? There's mutual interest. For example, Andre works at a company with people who are really involved in artificial intelligence. It seems to me that at some point, at the top of Maslow's pyramid, the interest in life extension wakes up very quickly.
Yeah, I think it's me again. First of all, I don't believe in the pyramid. And in order for us to want or desire anything at all, we need to be alive. That's the most basic need. Another thing is that our cultural pattern really makes us.
You know, I look at it this way. The first recorded case of seeking therapy against aging is the Ethic of Gilgamesh. A person became interested in prolonging life after he'd beaten everyone up, basically asserted himself in the city of Uruk, climbed to the top of the food chain or Maslow's pyramid, looked around, and realized he needed to focus on extending his life. I think this situation repeats itself, and that's why, well, there's some interest. Look, no matter what happens with artificial intelligence, people age and will get sick a lot. I believe that life extension is a trend. You can say the same about other diseases to the same extent as this one, because the amount of suffering from aging is enormous. And those people who have made a lot of money, look, the generation of people who are now dying in America is the richest generation in history. Right now, enormous amounts of money are being passed down to the younger generation. I think the generation that's now getting these resources into their hands will see what happened to the previous ones. I think there will be demand. I'm more concerned about what I jokingly call the scale of personality, whether we'll be able to deliver the necessary impact before everyone else decides it's too creepy, that it's impossible.
Well, what do you think? Great. Friends, I think this one big piece of news is enough for this episode. It's so packed, so important. And, I mean, we'll just blur things. Well, not even blur, but the news we've prepared can be moved to next time. Leisha, what do you think?
I think this is a huge, truly massive piece of news. So, Petra is a little shy about it. Misha is a bit less shy. But first of all, people from Russia with Russian passports have ever sold something to Big Pharma, right? You could probably count them on the fingers of, what, 2 hands, maybe? So, I mean, that's already a huge achievement in itself, right? And as for companies working on aging, on longevity, that have sold something to Big Pharma, that's also, well, just a handful of cases. So, really, I have to give a round of applause to Petra and the Gero team, and to Gero's investors who have supported them all these years. So, honestly, it's just really great. And it's yet another kind of validation for all of us, right, that pharma is interested.
Once again, the trend of aging is stronger than all those anti-trends we've been discussing.
Yes, Pharma has put its money in, real money, and even brought a suitcase full of biobucks, plus a lot of royalties too, right? Well, for example, the amount mentioned in the press release is in the millions, right? But on Gero's Twitter, it's already in the billions, right? Because Gero is counting how much royalty will be coming into the account. So, these $1 billion.
Yeah, old Alvin said that if you extend life by just 2 years, such a company would be worth. Well, we know from Novo Nordisk how much a company that extends life is worth. There's already an experimental benchmark. If you extend life by 1 year, you're worth $1 trillion. That's how it is, basically.
Yeah. Super. Excellent.
We're moving on to new numbers now.
Some data has come out.
And now it's trillions. So,
Some data has come out.
here they are.
The data. So, probably.
No, but there were also.
It's happening with everything else too.
Yeah, and there was also Andrew Scott's estimate of 37 trillion. Yeah, just in the US. The overall economic impact. Yeah, so.
That's the economic impact. We're talking about a company. You've got a data point. A European company that did about a quarter in a year. My pitch to the investor is really simple. 1 year equals 1 trillion.
Yeah, that's just awesome. Great.
Well, that sounds very promising for investors. There you go. Petia, thank you. Super.
Thanks.
Interesting. Once again, congratulations. We'll be trying to process some not so great. Never mind. What's important is that, for me, one of the takeaways from today's program is that we really need to focus our efforts more intensively on this new consensus so that there are more events, conferences, hackathons.
Right now, what's being decided is what will get funded and tested over, as we understand, the next 10 years. So right now, when the dust settles in a few years, when a new consensus emerges, we'll find out everything that's going to be tried in the near future.
Yeah. Let's give it a try.
What's being chosen right now, In our version of the multiverse, what's being chosen is what will be tried in this version.
Well, that's great.
At this very moment.
It's clear what needs to be done. Let's get to work, comrades.
Thank you so much. It's always nice to invite friends.
Bye.
Yeah, let's do it.